Gregor was still at home, and already his father was knocking at one of the side doors with his fist.
"Gregor! Gregor! What is it?"
At the door on the other side, however, came the soft, plaintive voice of his sister.
"Gregor, aren't you well? Do you need anything?"
"Just coming,"
he replied in both directions, and tried through enunciating as clearly as possible, and leaving long pauses between the words to make his voice sound as inconspicuous as possible. His father went back to his breakfast, but his sister whispered,
"Gregor, open up, please."
But Gregor had no intention of opening the door, and congratulated himself on his prudent habit, adopted from his travels, of locking all the doors at night, even when he was at home. First of all, he wanted to get up in peace and quiet, and only then think about what to do next. He recalled fairly often having felt some slight pain in bed, possibly as a result of lying awkwardly, which had turned out to be purely illusory once he was up, and he was curious to see how the morning's imaginings would gradually dissolve. Discarding the blanket was simple enough. He only needed to inflate himself a little, and it fell to the floor. But after that, things became more difficult, because of his extraordinary girth. He would have needed arms and hands to lift himself up. Instead, he had only his numerous legs that were in constant and multifarious motion, and over which he had no control. He tried at first to get the lower part of his body out of the bed, but this lower part, which he had incidentally not yet seen, proved too cumbersome. Progress was so slow, and when at last, having become almost wild, he mustered all his strength and thrust himself recklessly forward, it turned out that he had chosen the wrong direction. He bumped violently against the bottom end of the bed, and the searing pain he felt informed him that it was precisely this lower part of his body that might, for the time being, be the most sensitive. So he tried to get the upper part of his body out of bed first, twisting his head round to the edge of the bed. That was easy enough, and despite his girth and great weight, his body slowly followed the movement of his head. But when, at long last, he had got his head out over the side in mid-air, he became afraid of continuing in this manner, for if he were to fall like that, it would take a miracle for him not to sustain a head injury.
7 o'clock already,
he said to himself as the alarm rang once more, and for a short time he lay still, breathing quietly, hoping perhaps that such total silence might bring about a return to normal, everyday reality. But then he said to himself,
"Before it strikes 7:15, I must at all costs be right out of bed."
And he now set about rocking the whole length of his body evenly out of bed. If he let himself fall in this way, his head, which he intended to lift sharply as he fell, would presumably be unharmed. His back seemed to be hard. Hitting the carpet would probably cause him no damage. When Gregor was already protruding halfway out of the bed, it occurred to him how simple everything would be if somebody came to his aid. 2 strong people, he had in mind his father and the maid, would be quite enough. Well, quite apart from the fact that the doors were locked, ought he really call for help? Despite his great predicament, he was unable to suppress a smile at the thought. He had already reached the stage where, if he rocked fairly vigorously, he could scarcely keep his balance, and he would very soon have to make up his mind once and for all, when there was a ring at the apartment door.
"Someone from the office,"
he said to himself, and almost froze while his little legs danced even faster. For a moment all was silent.
"They're not answering,"
Gregor said to himself, seized by some insane hope. But then, of course, as always, the maid strode purposefully to the door and opened it. Gregor only needed to hear the visitor's first word of greeting to know who it was. The chief clerk himself. Why was Gregor, of all people, condemned to work for a firm where the slightest lapse promptly aroused the greatest suspicion? Was it necessary for the chief clerk to come in person? And more as a consequence of the agitation caused by these thoughts than as a result of true resolve, Gregor swung himself out of bed with all his might. There was a loud